The sun above the mining colony burned red through the dusty sky, casting long shadows over the metal walkways and rusted walls of the outer market. The place was loud with shouting voices, clicking gears, and the buzzing sounds of cheap hover drones floating just overhead. The smell of smoke and oil mixed with dry wind carried the scent of roasted meat from food stalls and the sharp stink of unwashed bodies. Among the crowd moved traders and miners, workers with tired eyes, merchants with heavy belts full of credits, and a few security bots scanning faces for trouble. In the middle of it all, barely noticed, a small girl moved like a shadow. Her skin had a faded violet tone, her frame so thin her bones seemed to press against her skin. Her clothes were not clothes at all, just pieces of old cloth stitched together and barely holding. Her feet were bare, scarred from walking on rough metal and broken glass. Her eyes kept shifting, watching everything with the sharpness of someone used to running, hiding, and surviving. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the deep ache of hunger. She had not eaten for 2 days. The last time she stole food, she was nearly caught. She had learned to move only when the merchant looked away, to snatch and vanish without a sound. Today she had waited long in the heat, crouched behind stacked metal crates. Her eyes fixed on a stall where round bread loaves steamed gently under warmers. Her dry lips parted slightly. Her hands gripped the edge of the crate. One more chance. The moment came quickly. The merchant turned to argue with a customer. In that instant, the girl ran. Her hand reached out like lightning, grabbed a loaf, and turned to escape. But luck was not with her this time. A red-eyed drone hovering above blinked sharply and let out a siren-like sound. The merchant turned and shouted. The drone shot a cable that wrapped around the girl's wrist. She pulled back, her eyes wild, but the drone's pull was too strong. Within seconds, 2 large security bots stomped forward, metal feet shaking the ground, grabbing her arms without care. A crowd started to gather. People turned, curious. Some laughed, some shook their heads. The merchant pointed angrily. That's the 3rd time this week. These parasites never learn. She's one of those scavenger races. No rights, no ID, no registration. The bots dragged the girl to a metal platform raised a few steps above the market floor. It was meant for public punishments. One of the bots connected a cable to a nearby terminal, scanning the girl's body. Her ID chip showed nothing. She had no papers, no owner, no family, no record. To the system, she didn't exist. And by the colony's law, stealing without ID was a high crime. Especially for an alien. The merchant stood on the edge of the platform and spoke loudly to the crowd. This is what happens when we let filth crawl through our streets. No rules, no manners, just thieving. Let her lose a limb. Maybe next time she'll learn not to steal from humans. The bots prepared the device. A sharp mechanical arm extended, fitted with a heated blade. It moved slowly toward the girl's left elbow. She didn't scream or cry. She just looked down, silent, empty, her face like stone. The crowd watched. No one stepped forward. No one cared, until one voice broke the silence. That's enough. The words were calm but firm. A human man stood just beyond the crowd. He looked like a traveler, clothes worn from long-distance travel, boots dusty, face marked with light scars. He had a rough bag slung across his shoulder and a wide belt with old tools hanging. His eyes, steady and cold, focused not on the girl but on the bots. The merchant frowned. Mind your business. The law is clear. The man stepped closer. The law says ID-less theft is punishable by limb removal. But it also says punishment can be claimed by a bonded human if they take full responsibility. The merchant laughed. That's an ancient clause. No one uses that. The man did not laugh. Still law. One of the bots paused, checking the code. The clause existed, rarely used, nearly forgotten, but real. If the human claimed the thief and agreed to cover the damage, the punishment would be canceled. The man stepped up to the platform. The girl looked at him with tired, wide eyes, still silent. She did not understand why a stranger would do this. "I'll take the claim," the man said. "I'll take her debt, whatever it is." The bot processed the request. A small scanner extended. The man placed his palm on it. A brief flash of light confirmed his ID. A second later, the blade retracted. The cables unlocked from the girl's limbs. The crowd started to murmur. Some people hissed, others laughed bitterly. "Fool," one said. "Waste of credits," said another. But the man ignored them all. He stepped down and offered his hand to the girl. She stared at for a long moment, confused. Then slowly, with a trembling hand, she took it. He led her away from the platform. The sun burned above them. The crowd melted back into its busy rhythm. Food was still being sold. Deals were still being shouted. The market had seen many strange things, but it forgot them quickly. Only one old trader watched them leave with narrowed eyes, remembering the strange law and the stranger man. The girl walked beside the human, holding the bread tightly against her chest. Her steps were weak, but she did not fall. She did not know where they were going or who this man truly was. She only knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, someone had stopped the blade. And that was something. The path away from the market twisted through narrow alleys made of rusted metal walls and flickering lights that blinked without rhythm. The ground under their feet was cracked and uneven, filled with old stains of oil and forgotten things. The human walked with steady steps, never looking back, never hesitating, as if he already knew these paths, as if he had walked them many times before. The girl followed behind him quietly, her arms wrapped tight around the warm loaf of bread pressed to her chest like treasure. Her bare feet hurt with every step, but she did not complain, not because the pain was small, but because pain was all she had ever known. They reached a quieter part of the colony where broken signs hung above closed doors, and strange sounds came from behind sealed shutters. The human stopped before a dull metal door bent slightly in the middle. He tapped a code into a small pad, and the lock clicked softly. The door slid open slowly with a long groan, and a stale smell came out like old dust and machine oil. The room inside was dark until he touched the wall, and weak yellow lights flickered to life. It was not much, but it was shelter. The room had 2 metal beds with thin covers, one small table with a dented water jug, a heating plate with 3 cracked bowls, and a small heater in the corner that hummed faintly. The air was dry but warm, and no one else was there. The girl stood still just inside the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to enter, if this was a trap, if this was real. The man walked in and dropped his bag on the table, then turned to face her. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the smaller bed. She obeyed slowly, still clutching the bread, as if it might vanish if she let go. Her hands were shaking, not just from fear, but from weakness, hunger, exhaustion. Her head felt light, and her legs barely held her weight. She sat on the bed and looked at him, waiting for the next command or punishment. But none came. "Eat," he said quietly. "You can finish that when I have more." She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. Then she pulled off a small piece and placed it in her mouth. It was soft, warm, slightly sweet. Her eyes widened a little, as if her mouth could not believe it was tasting real food. Her hands moved faster now, tearing more, chewing more, swallowing fast like a wild creature, not sure if the meal would be taken back. The man turned his back to give her space. He opened his bag and pulled out a small packet of dried fruit and placed it on the table. He poured some water into a cup and set it beside the fruit. He did not speak as she ate, only watched her from the side, not with pity, not with judgment, just with quiet attention. When she finished the bread, she wiped her mouth with her sleeve and looked up at him again. Her voice cracked like old paper when she finally spoke. "Why?" He looked at her and said nothing for a few seconds, then sat on the edge of the other bed, stretched out his legs, and leaned back against the wall, because the law allows it, and because no one else would. That answer did not make sense to her, not fully, but she did not question it again. She looked down at her hands now empty and placed them on her lap quietly. Her eyes wandered around the room. The dull lights, the rough walls, the silent corners. This was not home, but it was safer than the streets. In her arm was still attached, and that was more than she had expected today. The man finally asked her something. "Do you have a name?" She paused, then nodded slowly, said it in a low voice, barely louder than a whisper, a name that sounded rough in the human tongue, full of strange sounds, but he repeated it with care, trying to get it right. She gave a small nod again, then asked, "Yours," he told her. A simple name, short and plain one, she could say without effort. She repeated it under her breath a few times, then stared at him again, unsure of what came next. "You're not from here," he said. She nodded. "Where?" Then she did not speak at first, but then after a long pause, she began to speak slowly. Her words were simple, broken, but clear enough. Her world had been green once, full of trees and soft soil and large rivers. She remembered the sound of birds with bright feathers and nights filled with glowing insects. But then the ships came, loud metal monsters from the sky. They tore up the land, searching for minerals. They took the strong and sold them off. The rest were left to die. The sky turned gray, the rivers dried, the animals vanished. She had run and somehow ended here. He listened without interrupting, not asking for more details, just letting her speak. She looked surprised that he did not mock her or walk away. She had told this story once before to another stranger who had laughed and called her dramatic. But this human just sat there, quiet, eyes steady, not cold, not soft. "Just listen and you're alone," he said at last. She nodded again. "Not anymore," he said. "Not today." She looked at him long and hard, trying to see if he meant it, or if it was a lie like so many before. She wanted to believe it, but she had believed before, and it had hurt. She would wait and see. The heater in the corner hummed gently, and the lights flickered again. Outside, the wind howled against the metal walls of the colony, but inside the room, it was still. The girl curled up on the small bed, pulled the thin blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. Her body relaxed slowly, her muscles still, half ready to flee, but the warmth was real. The food was in her belly, and her arm was still hers. Man sat on the other bed, watching the door, listening for trouble, thinking about the decision he had just made. It would not be easy. People in this colony did not like aliens, especially those without papers. The law had protected her for now, but it would not protect them forever. Still, he had made a choice, and he would see it through. As the girl drifted into uneasy sleep, her last thought was strange and new. She wondered if this was what safety felt like, and if maybe, just maybe, she could dream again. Morning came slow on the colony, and the km red light of the rising sun pushed gently through the cracks in the broken panels above the ceiling. The girl opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the pale glow. Her body still sore from sleep that felt too deep. Her first breath was filled with the scent of warmed air and metal. Her second breath brought something else, something she had never felt in many cycles before. It was peace, not the kind that came from joy, but the kind that came from not needing to run. She turned her head and saw the man seated at the small table, his eyes scanning the screen of an old data pad, the device humming quietly in his hands. His face was focused, calm, but not cold. He looked up as he felt her watching and gave a small nod, not a smile, not a command. Just a nod, as if to say, "Good, you're awake, and that's enough for now. There is water on the table," he said, "and food too. Eat what you can. Then we need to walk." The girl moved from the bed slowly, her limbs stiff and her feet still sore from the day. Before she approached the table, cautiously picked up the cup and drank the water in short, careful sips, as if expecting it to be taken away. The food beside it was plain, just boiled grain and some dried fruit, but she ate without complaint, her hands shaking only a little. He watched her for a moment, then returned to his screen, his fingers tapping gently before he finally spoke again. "I asked around last night, sent a few quiet messages. Someone is looking for you, and not just the local guards, not just the market thugs. This is something deeper." She froze, her hand stopping halfway to her mouth. Someone nodded, eyes still on the screen. "You are not just a starving girl to them. Someone wants you badly, and that means danger, not just for you, Now but for me too. She placed the bowl down, her fingers tightening. She knew this would come. Nothing good ever stayed, nothing kind ever lasted. She stood from the chair, slowly stepped back from the table, her eyes moving toward the door, toward the cracks in the wall. Any way out? He looked at her then, and his voice lowered, firm, but not harsh. Don't run. If you run now, they will find you and take you, and this time no one will stop the blade, or worse. She did not move, but her eyes stayed on the door, her muscles tense like a cornered animal. Not your owner, he said. I don't want to be. I don't even want you to be here forever. But I did take your debt, and that binds us by law and by honor. I won't let them have you, not yet, not while I have a choice. The girl looked at him, then really looked, and saw something strange in his eyes. Not pity, not fear, but something heavy, like he carried his own shadows, his own story, not so different from hers. You were taken when? She asked softly. His face did not change much, but his silence told the truth. Long time ago. He said, different place, different war, different kind of cage. But yes, someone saved me too. Someone broke the rules for me. Someone gave me a second chance, so now it's my turn. She sat down again, her body still tense, but no longer ready to flee. Her eyes watched him with something new, not trust, not yet, but something close enough to start. They left the shelter after midday, moving through side alleys, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints. The man had wrapped her in an old cloak, hiding her face and arms, making her look smaller and less strange. They walked past tired workers, drunk gamblers, and children playing with scraps of metal. No one looked twice. Their destination was a hidden corner of the colony near the old mining district, where empty warehouses stood like dead giants, broken and forgotten. He led her to one that looked worse than the rest, but inside was a network of back rooms and secret passages, a safe house used by smugglers, traders, mercenaries, and those who lived by the edge of law. Inside, a tall woman with mechanical arms greeted them, her expression unreadable. She and the man exchanged few words, sharp and fast. Then she waved them inside and handed over a small disc. That's all I have for now, she said. You better move quick. Once they know you've got her, they'll send more than street thugs. The man nodded and thanked her, then led the girl through another hidden exit into an old freight tunnel that ran beneath the colony walls. The air was thick with dust and silence, their footsteps echoing against the stone and steel. Why are they looking for me? The girl asked, her voice low and dry. Man glanced at her, then shrugged slightly. Maybe they want what you saw. Maybe you escaped something important. Maybe it's not you, but your blood. Maybe someone paid a price for you, and now they want it back. I don't know yet, but I will find out. They reached a locked door at the end of the tunnel. The man placed the disc on the panel, and the door slid open, slowly revealing a narrow passage lit by flickering blue lights, at the end of which waited a transport bay where a small vessel rested, old but strong looking, like it had seen too many fights and survived them all. He turned to her before stepping in. If you come with me, I can keep you hidden for a while, not forever, but long enough to figure this out, long enough to get you somewhere safer, maybe even to people of your kind, if any still live. And if I stay? She asked. He looked back down the tunnel, his jaw tight. If you stay, they'll find you, and they'll make you vanish. Stood in silence for a long moment, her eyes on the ship, then on the path behind them, then on the man who had stopped the blade, fed her, let her sleep, listened to her story, and now was giving her another choice. She stepped onto the ship without a word, and the man followed her, sealing the door behind them as the engines warmed with a low hum, and the lights flickered to life around them as the ship lifted from the bay and rose above the colony walls. The girl stood near the window, watching the metal spires and smoke fade into the distance, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something else. The faint shape of hope taking root. The man sat at the controls, hands steady, eyes forward, saying nothing, but his presence was enough for now. Somewhere far ahead waited answers and danger, and maybe more pain, but at least they would face it together. Ship flew through the quiet channels of deep space, far from trade routes, far from any system marked on regular charts. The stars outside blinked slowly, distant and cold, and inside the ship the silence was only broken by the hum of the engines and the soft beeping of old machines. The girl sat near a narrow window, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face resting against her arms, as her eyes watched the blur of stars that seemed to drift endlessly. Man worked quietly at the control panel, checking fuel levels, rerouting energy, and watching for signals. There were none for now, just open space and old paths, known only to smugglers, outcasts, and those with reasons to hide. He glanced back at the girl from time to time, not saying much, just making sure. She was still there, still breathing, still safe. She hadn't spoken much since they left the colony, and he didn't push her. Silence was its own language, one he understood well. But even silence had weight, and one night when the lights dimmed for sleep and the stars outside seemed more still than usual, she spoke not with fear or anger, but with a small, tired voice too. "You think I'm dangerous?" The man looked up from his seat, his eyes soft but sharp, thinking before answering, because her question was not simple, and the wrong words might close her off again. "You are hungry, you are scared, and you have no one. That doesn't make you dangerous. That makes you alone." She was quiet for a moment, then turned her head slowly. "But they think I'm something else." "They don't think at all," he replied. "They follow orders, they follow fear. They follow the easiest answer. Why did you help me then?" "Because I saw myself in your face." The girl blinked slowly, but said nothing more, and he did not speak again either, letting the silence return not as a wall, but as a blanket, soft and heavy. Time passed slowly in the dark places of space. The man taught her how to clean the filters, how to warm the food packs, how to read basic ship panels. She didn't ask many questions, but she watched closely and learned fast, like someone who had learned that survival depended on noticing every detail. One evening while checking cargo, he found her sketching shapes into the dust on the floor, spirals and marks he didn't recognize, symbols of her people, maybe, or memories from a world now lost. He asked what they meant, and she said nothing, but she didn't wipe them away. They stopped once on a silent moon where an old contact left supplies in exchange for parts. The man traded carefully, always keeping one eye on the sky, because he knew they were still being hunted. It wasn't over, not yet, and deep in his bones he felt something was coming, something close, something hungry. It came 3 days later, a coded message. Cracked the ship's security net, late in the cycle, a signal that didn't belong to any trade beacon or navigation tower. It was layered, hidden, and old, but he knew it for what it was, a hunter's pulse, a tracking echo designed to sniff out those who ran. He rose from his seat at once, heart steady, mind already racing. He went to the girl, found her sleeping in the side berth, her arms curled around an old fabric strip from the market stall, the one she had refused to throw away. He touched her shoulder gently, and she woke at once. No panic, just alertness. "They found us," he said, his voice low and firm. She nodded once, then stood, moved together quickly, the man preparing emergency lockdowns and rerouting the ship's course through an asteroid belt, sharp and narrow. The girl helped where she could, powering the internal dampeners, closing hatches, dragging the loose packs to safety. They didn't speak because there was no time for fear, only movement, only action. The enemy ship appeared without warning, slicing through the dark like a black spear. Its body was smooth and quiet, its lights dim, its weapons charged. The man knew at once it wasn't colony police or bounty traders. This was something worse, something from the deeper places. A ship with no flag, no law, only the cold hunger of paid hunters. The first shot hit their side, spinning the ship hard. The girl fell against the wall with a cry, but she stood again. Without help, blood trailing from her elbow, the man shouted for her to stay down and pulled the ship into a dive, the engines howling as metal scraped metal across the asteroid field. For 10 minutes they flew like that, dodging shadows, fire, and stone. He fired back only once, a shot meant not to hit but to warn. Then he pulled them into a blind zone near a crater where no signals could reach, no eyes could follow inside. The ship, the lights flickered. The air smelled like burnt wires. The girl coughed and wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her breath shaky, but her eyes still clear. "Are we dead?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, and touched her shoulder again, steady, strong, not lying, but not giving up. "Why do they want me so badly?" She asked again the same question, but this time full of heat and anger, not confusion. He knelt beside her and looked into her eyes, because you remind them of what they destroyed, because you are proof that their war wasn't clean, because your face tells a story. They want to erase, then let them come, she whispered, her voice sharp now. Not loud but strong. He smiled, not with joy, but with something older, something like respect. They won't stop, he said. Neither will I, she replied. The ship rested in silence again, hidden in the crater, shielded by dust and stone. The man sat up silent, scans and watched the screens for movement. The girl sat beside him, now not curled, not hiding, but upright, watching too. Her presence was no longer just a weight. It was a shape with purpose and fire. She reached for the tool belt beside him, picked up a small scanner, and began checking the wires, not waiting for his order, just doing what needed to be done. The man said nothing, just let her work beside him in the dark out. There the stars still burned cold and far, but inside the ship there was something warmer, something like a bond forged, not by blood or duty, but by the will to protect. And in that moment, both knew the next time the enemy came, they would not run. They would fight. The ship lay still within the stone cradle of the crater, its metal skin marked with fire scars and smoke stains, the engines cold, the air heavy with the scent of melted wires and machine oil. The silence outside was deep and wide, but inside the ship the silence felt alive, breathing with tension, waiting for what was coming next. The man sat in the pilot's chair, his fingers moving across the controls, making final adjustments, rerouting systems to back channels, isolating the main core from any outside breach, while his eyes remained sharp, scanning every signal, every flicker, every shift in background noise. Girl stood beside him now, not as a frightened passenger, but as a part of the ship, part of the crew. Her thin fingers holding a data tool, her mind focused on the pulse of the scanners, reading layers of code, searching for threats, understanding more with each passing hour. She had changed in these days away from the colony. The fear still lingered in her bones, but something else had risen over it, something like quiet fire. Her eyes steady, her voice more certain, her steps no longer hesitant. They had not spoken much in the past day, only words that needed saying, only plans that needed sharing. There was no room for questions about why or how or what if, only the knowledge that someone was coming, someone who would not stop and who would not ask before striking. The hunter ship had vanished from sensors for now, but both knew that was only silence before the storm, only the breath before the blade came down again. Showed her how to route the ship's limited defenses, how to track power surges, how to manually lock the doors in case of override. She watched every move, asked few questions, but her hands repeated his actions perfectly, her mind absorbing without effort. They worked together, not as adult and child, not as protector and victim, but as two lives caught in the same fire, trying to shape it rather than burn inside it. Later, when the night cycle came and the stars grew brighter above the crater, they sat near the side panel where warmth still leaked from the emergency vents. He handed her a piece of old ration bread and a small cube of sweet fruit, rare but kept for emergencies. She chewed slowly, then looked at him with a question in her eyes, one that had waited for too long. If we survive this, where will we go? He leaned back against the panel, looking up through the narrow crack in the ceiling where the stars winked like frozen embers. There's a place out past the fractured rim, an old station, built before the war, still free from the new laws. They don't ask questions, and they don't sell names. I have friends there, if they're still breathing. They'll help, and after that, he turned his head to meet her eyes. Then, you choose no more running, unless you want to, no more hiding, unless you must. You can become whatever you wish, and I'll make sure no one stops you. She nodded once, her fingers curling around the edge of her seat, holding tight to those words like a thread in the dark, not because she doubted him, but because she wanted to believe them fully and needed to feel them in her hands. The warning came without sound, a red light blinking near the top of the control board, a low vibration beneath their feet, the return of the hunter ship, cloaked but close, too close for escape, too close for silence anymore. The man rose without panic, his body already moving to stations, his Voice low but fast, they found us shields up now, power to lower deck, seal hatches, reroute command to auxiliary. Girl was already moving her hands, dancing across the panel, her voice steady override. Code confirmed, rerouting, complete, shields online. Weapons ready. The sky above the crater cracked open as the enemy vessel descended. Silent and slow, like a beast that had waited long for the final strike. Lights along its belly lit the dust and stone with eerie color, red and white and gold. Its guns rotating its hull, humming with charge. The man stood at the front of the cabin, his fingers tight around the support rail, eyes fixed on the shape. A buff they are not here to capture. He said they're here to erase. Then let's show them we don't. Vanish easy, she replied, and her voice did not shake. The first strike came fast, a blast to the crater wall, meant to bury them alive. The ship rocked. Hard systems flickering, but still stable. He launched their only long-range missile, not to hit, but to scatter their sensors, and it worked for a moment, long enough to power the core boost, just enough to push them from the crater mouth into open air. Enemy followed, faster, heavier, more armed, but not expecting resistance from a half-dead vessel. Driven by a man and a girl who refused to fall without a fight, she manned the defense grid, locking bursts onto weak spots, damaging their outer shell, forcing them to dodge. He rerouted power mid-flight, balancing between engine and shield, spinning the ship between blasts so their core stayed out of range. They could not win this fight, not fully, not in firepower, not in strength, but they could buy time, and they did. Every second paid with skill and courage. Every move designed not to kill, but to delay until the sky opened once more, and another signal cracked through the static, a new vessel entering range. This one bore no hunter code. It carried an old signal buried deep, a frequency tied to old allies the man once served long ago. Before he turned away from war, before he chose peace over orders. The message was short but clear: assistance inbound, hold position, activating scramble net. The girl caught it first, her eyes wide, then turned to him with a light he had not seen before. Not fear, not anger, but something bright like dawn after long darkness. We're not alone. He nodded once and angled the ship toward the signal, letting the new craft engage. The enemy pushing the hunter back with fresh fire and stronger walls. The fight raged behind them, but they did not turn back. The path ahead was clear, and the signal grew stronger. They reached the old station 2 days later, floating in quiet orbit above a small blue moon, its structure aged but alive, its ports open, its lights steady. They docked with care and stepped onto metal ground that did not shake with war or scream with alarms. The girl looked around with wide eyes and smelled air that was clean and felt wind that was real. The man spoke with the contact who came to greet them, an old friend with tired eyes and a strong voice, someone who had not forgotten old debts. She's under my name now, he said, not as property, not as burden, but as kin. Treat her as one of us, and they did in the days that followed. The girl began to walk without watching shadows. She ate without hiding her hands. She slept without dreams of blades and hunger. She learned to write in the human script and taught others the songs of her lost world. One evening, she sat beside the man, watching the sky through the open dome, and asked him again, why did you really save me? He looked at her then, not with mystery, not with pain, but with peace, because someone saved me, and because the fire they lit in me never died. And now she understood the end.